The family is such a basic building block of society. Even priests who leave our birth families are called father. Sometimes they're called other things. The other day I was in the confessional, and a lady came in. Of course, she had a little boy about 2.5 years old, maybe. So she didn't want to leave him out in the church. She brought him in with her. And he was curious as to who that was sitting on the other side of the screen. And she says, es a padre. And he wasn't satisfied. And finally, he looked around the screen and he says, abuelito. So that made me remember I'm 73, so. But anyway, the family is so important to us. And the church has given us this Feast of the Holy Family precisely so that we would look at the holiness of our own families. So the first thing we would need to do is to say, well, what does holiness mean? What is it that you're after when you say you're called to be holy by God? I think the best definition that I know of is to say that holiness simply means you're friends with God and with other people. So your relationship with God develops in the same way that your relationship with other people develops. It goes through some processes like first you get to know the person, especially through conversation. And once you get to know the person pretty well, you begin to trust them. You have faith in them. And then you perhaps even are called to help them or to be of service in some way. And if you get to a very good, strong relationship with the person, you're willing to sacrifice yourself for them, and when it's necessary, you ask their forgiveness. So if you apply those same processes to our relationship with God in the context of the family, we see that our getting to know God works in a family setting in the sense of through prayer. We get to know everybody through conversation. You get to know God through prayer. So if you're trying to grow as a family in your relationship with God, you're going to have some family prayer, especially the Scriptures. So, for instance, if we took this gospel reading tonight and we read it, and it said, "Okay, what do you get out of this?" Someone might say, "Well, what strikes me is how Jesus, even though he felt his call by his Father, responds in obedience to his earthly father, his earthly mother." So then maybe a prayer would come out of that saying, "Lord, help us to know in what ways we can be more obedient to you, what ways we can show our obedience and make our obedience to our parents, for instance, an act of virtue, an act pleasing to you." So we can make our conversation with the Lord into our prayer and into a way of helping us as a whole family grow. The second thing is that because prayer is also using the Scriptures, we're learning more and more about God. And we're learning more and more to trust Him the more we learn how loving He is. Third part of that is then we put greater faith in Him, even as a family. Maybe there are family crises, but we know as a family that we can depend upon God. We know that we don't always understand what He does or what His reasons for doing anything, but we encourage one another in that kind of faith, in that kind of loyalty to Him. Sometimes we're going to be called upon not only to serve each other, we're doing that many times in the family setting, whether it's doing dishes or vacuuming the carpet or washing the car, whatever it is, but it also means serving the Lord in some ways. And maybe as a whole family, you can find some ministries. A ministry here in the parish, for instance. Maybe the children would be altar servers. Maybe one of the parents would be Eucharistic minister. Maybe another parent would be a choir member or a reader or an usher. So all of us go together as a family, and we serve the Lord as a family. Sometimes it requires sacrifice. And those things are oftentimes things that we had not planned on doing. Sometimes it's the sacrifice of being patient with the shortcomings of other family members. You know, in getting to know other family members, we're often satisfied to know their negative qualities and we don't make the effort to think about their positive qualities. The people we are most in conflict with are the people that are closest to us. They're the ones that are rubbing elbows with us. So the sacrifice sometimes means saying to somebody, thank you for doing this, even though I might feel irritated at other times, or if you don't mind, would you help me with this? So treating one another well can be a sacrifice in itself. Sometimes there's major sacrifices, putting up with pain, putting up with anxiety. And then all those sacrifices we as a family can bring to Mass. Because in this Eucharist, which is the sacrifice of Jesus, we offer God the Father also our sacrifices. It makes them into gold in the sight of God. And then finally, we sometimes have to say, I'm sorry. And it might be a good family practice to come to the church once a month as a whole family group, each one going to confession, reconciling himself. And maybe we might even have to say to each other, look, I confess this, and I'm sorry that I was so crabby with you the other day. So those are ways in which we can grow in holiness, ways in which our family is a context. It's the house of the Lord, basically. It is what Father Patrick Peyton referred to when he said, the family that prays together stays together. We can broaden that a little bit and say, the family that grows in friendship among its members and with God is a family that grows in holiness. Let's stand to profess our faith.